Hi everyone, and welcome to my guide for the Gears of Dreadlands or GoD for Season 21. This is the new Demon Hunter set and it's pretty amazing. I've played it a lot during the PTR, and also keep in mind that this video is made during the PTR, so we don't have the final patch notes yet, but I think that it's gonna go live pretty much as is or with some minor tweaks. So in case anything significant changes, I might remake the guide, or otherwise I'll just update, maybe have like a pinned comment here on this video that you can check out. And obviously the defeat planners are also not final yet, because I have a placeholder Marauder set up in all of them, because the new set doesn't exist in defeat planner yet. So I'm gonna update them whenever I can, as soon as it's ready. But it is just like a little disclaimer for this video. So here we go, the Gears of Dreadlands. It's the new set and it revolves around strafe. So you might have seen some footage already, and it's strafe and generators. So the way this works essentially is coming from the 4-piece bonus, and it makes it so that you shoot your generators automatically while strafing. What you have to know here is that most of your DPS will be done during strafing, and you just have to stack this momentum buff from the 2-piece bonus a little bit with your generators. So the 2-piece gives you a 4-second buff that can stack up to 20 seconds, so essentially 5 attacks, and this will increase your damage and your movement speed. And like this you can basically strafe around and deal most of your damage while strafing, and then every 4 seconds you have to refresh with 1 generator cast at the very least at least. And then the 6-piece buffs you with a ton of damage. So this is the basic principle of the set. And this makes it a very good speed farming set, a very good solo Demon Hunter setup. It's gonna most likely be the strongest solo DH pushing set, with like upwards of 140 clears on the high end. And we are probably gonna have a speed farming meta that will replace the rats, or at least compete with rats. So this is currently the expectation, to go at around like tier 120 or so, tier 125 even on the high end, for like well-geared and well-optimized groups. So this is kind of the same level as rats in Season 20, but probably slightly slower. So rats typically are a little bit faster, like 2.5 minutes, and this is probably going to be like 2.5 to 3 minutes. But yeah, it's going to be one of the best XP farming setups at least. So overall, it's looking very good for Demon Hunter, and now we can go with the setup here. So imagine this is the God set now. We have the Marauders here, so we have the normal typical 6 pieces equipped, and we want to use Hanging Arrow, Devouring Arrow as our main DPS skill. You can use Bolas. They also buffed Bolas, but we have the new 9th series Satchel, which gives it 100% chance to pierce and a big damage boost. And this makes it so that the arrow just pierces a couple times and then disappears after a certain distance traveled. And if you stack up enough targets, you can potentially scale this Devouring Arrow to a lot of damage that I've also shown in some videos. But if you get like something like 20, 30, 40 pierces, the damage goes through the roof, and you can potentially do quadrillions of damage in one hit. So this is extremely strong. This is also why you want to generally group up stuff really tightly, especially in groups. This is nice with something like Briggs Wrath pulling, or Ground Stomp from the Barb, or also yourself. You can do it with your follower, with as a Johan, or also as Johan equipped. And that's actually a pretty valid choice, simply because this stacking mechanic benefits Devouring Arrow a lot. So this is the main skill that you want to use for your DPS. And then of course we have Strafe. There's only one reasonable choice here, which is Drifting Shadow. Another option could be Icy Trail, but I don't really have a use for that. So the Icy Trail applies a slow ground effect that can help you out a little bit to proc Bane of the Trapped and so on, but typically it's this rune. And otherwise we have Smoke Screen is like a typical setup here, where you just like strafe around and you can use this while strafing, so you don't have to interrupt your DPS, and it gives you lots of survivability. And then we have Vengeance, which is part of most Demon Hunter builds anyway, so this is nothing special. We have Dawn here, and like this you get lots of damage and damage reduction. Yeah, and then there's a few options here, so it also depends on what kind of content you're playing. For example, this is a solo pushing setup. I have a Preparation Focus Mind here to give you more Smoke Screen uptime. We have Entangling Shot. Odyssey's End got buffed a lot, so instead of 25% damage, this is 150% damage boost now. This is additive damage, and this also applies to all of your group members. So a support setup is quite viable, or just as like a supporting skill, even for your own DPS, this is extremely strong. So with this, for example, this is a 2 generator setup. You can swap around between the 2 generators to keep up the buff. It lasts 4 seconds with the heavy burden rune, and then you can do DPS, for example, doing your convention cycles, and you can blast stuff down really fast. The other items you have here in the cube is Death Diggers. So this is a very strong bonus, simply the best armor piece you can have here. Hunter's Wrath, this one also got buffed, and it's up to 150% damage bonus, I believe, plus the faster attacks. So must have essentially for this build. And then we have like some supporting items like the Versatility, giving you some toughness, and for example, focus and restraint rings for a pushing scenario. In T16, it's, you know, it has really good damage. You don't really need so much DPS. You can easily drop this for something like Everrise Band and Storm Jordan, for example. Even Ratchet's Ring you can do, and so on. So there's some flexibility on the lower end setups, and you want to optimize for a bit more DPS when you go higher. Then we have the passive skills. Typically, you're gonna run Ambush and Call the Weak, because these are pretty strong DPS passives. And then you can put other ones in, like Awareness to give you the G-Def proc. Numbing Traps is really nice. The setup is not really super tanky, especially when you're pushing solo. You want to have really big pulls, and you will die sometimes probably if you're not careful. So you know, any kind of defense helps here, and this is a very strong passive for that. But otherwise, for example, for speed setups, you can go Tactical Advantage. You get 60% movement speed from this as a bonus, on top of the 160 that you already get from the strafing. So when you stack momentum to the maximum, you have 160% bonus mobility, which is really fast. So yeah, you can already move around really fast with this, and you can potentially go like 600%, 700% movement speed or so if you want, if you stack like all the mobility there is, and then this kind of becomes obsolete. Also another passive, especially for speed farming, is Blood Vengeance. That gives you simply more uptime, and it makes it everything easier to just strafe around without running out of hatred, and also more smokescreen. So to discuss the Bolas setup a little bit, they also buffed Bolas, and Bolas works with the set, but right now Bolas are quite weak. So Hanging Arrow has really strong mechanics because of this piercing and devouring arrow effect, but the Bolas don't really have that, don't really add anything. They have this pulling mechanic through the Leonine bow of the Hashir, but that also doesn't really cut it. So if you want to push with Bolas, you have to expect that you are probably around 10 tiers weaker or so than Hanging Arrow, and we don't know exactly, because of how well these setups get optimized and eventually fished with. But this is kind of like my expectation right now. I already suggested to buff the Bolas a little bit, so we'll see. For T16, Bolas is definitely fine if you like that, and you're gonna have enough DPS even for like low GRs. If you don't really care too much about going for the most efficient setup, you can do Bolas, but keep in mind it's a bit weaker. But yeah, to each their own. It's definitely a viable choice. And the rune you would use for Bola, especially for T16, would be Bitter Pill, which is something that gives you more discipline, so you can just strafe around and smoke screen even more and go really fast. Or otherwise for DPS you go Imminent Doom, which is the highest damage rune here. Keep in mind you also have to change your equipped items a little bit. Bola requires 2 items in the weapon slot, which is the quiver and also the bow. And for Hanging Arrow you just have the quiver, so there's also another advantage for Hanging Arrow here. In T16 you can change it around a bit. For example, here there is no Odyssey's End, and instead we have Fortress Ballista and Squirts. You can also wear something like Yang's V-Curve actually. That's quite nice because it gives you tons of resource cost reduction, and like this you're gonna have no trouble whatsoever. Especially for bounties, I would recommend this. For bounties, this is a very strong setup because you can just perma smoke screen, strafe around. You have no issue whatsoever. Everything will die around you, and this is definitely a pretty solid choice here to go with Yangs. You can drop something like the Trapped. You don't want Color Weak and so on. You don't even have any slows, so you just go straight up and blast everything down with the damage you have already, and then you can go Taeguk. And for example, something like Boon of the Hoarder, which is always a good choice in T16 Rifts, they give you like the extra gold income. Also, for example, the Bracer slot can be swapped out here. In Bounties, you don't need Nemesis Bracers, for example, like you do in T16 Rifts. So you can just go with taking Arm Guards. And for example, here we have Ring of Auric Ranger, so you can wear the Death Diggers and you can get a killer in. So this is kind of up to you. And then this just makes it easier to, for example, teleport out, or just, you know, click on certain bounties where, you know, monsters spawn around you and so on. So it just makes you super tanky in those cases. Or you can like increase your mobility even more, you know, go Realm Spelled or whatever you like. One thing I should mention for this T16 setup here is it has Rain of Vengeance, and you don't really need this. The reason why I included this is because the most efficient way to farm keys to this will be to use the Cane swap on the Rift Guardian. And that looks like this. So you swap to Natalia's and the Cane set, and you press Rain of Vengeance and then kill the boss with Hanging Arrow anyway. And this is the idea here. You get 25% extra keys, and you get the big multiplier from Natalia's because it has a, you know, different setup of set pieces. And like this, you can have the 6-piece multiplier, which otherwise you couldn't with the Canes on the GoD. So this is something that you can do if you like to get a lot of keys. I'll definitely do this, but it involves a lot of item swaps. But yeah, you can just ignore this if you like, and then also swap the Rain of Vengeance to something else. For solo push, your main gems will be Simplicity Strength. You're going to use this in every single setup of this build because it's 100% damage bonus on the max rank 150. And this is much higher than any other DPS gem, so really nice. On top of that, you get the 4% healing per shot. So this actually applies to the projectiles generated by your strafe, and you can heal for a lot just because of this gem essentially. So this covers all your recovery, and you don't really have to go for life per hit and so on. You just stack as much toughness as possible because you also heal more the more toughness you have with this gem. So that's pretty neat. Other than that, Bane for Trapped, simply really strong the offensive bonus. You can also go with Taeguk here, especially in setups that don't run Odyssey's End. But Taeguk is also additive category, just as Odyssey's End. So when you have this big number already from the bow, then you don't really want Taeguk, you want to go with Bane for Trapped. And then, of course, you have to bench Stricken to kill the boss for you. I have to add that I actually experiment a lot with the different solo setups for pushing, and it's not really quite clear what is going to be the best one. So I tried, you know, with Odyssey's End, without Odyssey's End, with Squirt's Necklace and Fortis Ballista, or with Flavor of Time and just, you know, Aching Fury or something. So there's some options here. There's actually some certain setups that attack more themselves instead of strafing, and then they stack like lots of attack speed and so on. The thing is, you cannot change the rate at which you proc those projectiles on a 4-piece bonus. It's always at a fixed rate of once every 10 frames, which equals 6 times a second because the game runs at 60 FPS. So it's always the same unless you're at a very, very low, unrealistically low attack speed value, and your strafe breakpoint will be too low, but this doesn't happen unless you specifically try to make that happen. So any attack speed value that is like, you know, with a quiver and the 10% from Paragons, like even if you have a really slow crossbow, you're gonna have this breakpoint, and adding more attack speed doesn't really do anything. So you don't really want to avoid attack speed, but it also doesn't really help you much. Besides, for example, in a double generator setup, would make it a little bit easier to swap between the generators because you have to do manual casts for those when you want to keep up your intending shot buff. And also it gives you a little bit more stricken stacking on bosses. So when you're solo pushing, this also helps you a little bit. But generally, attack speed is a pretty dead stat. You want to stack mainly something like area damage. Make sure you have your Primal Vengeance through your cooldown rolls. You need 3 cooldown rolls or 37% sheet cooldown. And also, otherwise, you just stack like physical damage, for example, on your rings, which is really nice. So here's a solo speed setup, and this is rather similar to a solo pushing setup. We just replace the Stricken with a Taeguk, so we have a little bit more damage and also some toughness. And I went with the Squirts plus Fortis Ballista setup here. And this is something you can push with as well if you include the Stricken, but generally for speed farming this works really well because it's rather easy to keep up the Fortis Ballista and the Squirts effect, and with the shield generally most stuff will not really go through once you have optimized your character a little bit. You can take a hit or two and still keep your Squirts. So this is nice, but to make it a little bit easier, we also have Elusive Ring. So just the additional toughness is really handy here and gives you much more consistency in your Squirts uptime. Other than that, it comes down to, you know, your own dodging and timing with the smoke screen. So keep in mind, your success depends a little bit on this, but even if the Squirts drops, it's not the end of the world. It just, you know, goes back up after a few seconds. But you can like squeeze out, you know, like another 1 or 2 tiers by playing around this amulet pretty well. Otherwise, this is also pretty straightforward. You just get a big momentum buff, straight around. It's really strong for solo speeds. I would say that, you know, once you have all the vital pieces together, you can already start in like somewhere in the 80s at the very least, with like 500k sheet damage and like level 0 gems, and then you quickly progress up to at least 90, 95s, and even up to 100s or so will be quite feasible once you've farmed a few paragons, like 1k paragon or so, 1.2k, a few ancient pieces, and maybe an ancient weapon, and so on. So this is the expectation. So like 100 plus speeds is kind of the minimum for someone who's like well geared, I'd say. And you can also like change it around a bit. You don't really have to go for squirts here. You can also go with a crossbow, for example. If you like at the start of the season, you find a really nice ancient crossbow, you can just wear that instead of the Fortress Ballista. So you keep the Dawn, you ignore squirts, or maybe you wear it anyway, and sometimes you have a few stacks. The thing is that because your attack rate is fixed from the strafe at 6 times a second, it doesn't really matter that you have a crossbow equipped, so you actually do more damage per shot while firing the same amount of shots. And a crossbow is roughly 37% stronger than a one-handed crossbow, so that especially early on when you find a really nice weapon, you can just go for it, and then later on you try to transition to this Fortress Ballista setup, which played optimally is still a bit stronger because squirts is such a nice boost. But this is definitely an option. And finally, here we have a 4-man speed setup. So that's something that probably 1 or 2 demon hunters would play in 4-man speeds with like a barb, and then like one other support like a monk or a support necro or support demon hunter. So there is some variation here. We don't know exactly what people really play, but definitely it's going to be something like this. And you can also include all these in if you want. So you can drop the Fortress Ballista in favor of the bow again. But otherwise, this is very similar to the solo speed setup. Just we try to wear the 2 weapons instead of cubing the Fortress Ballista or the Dawn, because you can squeeze out a bit more DPS like this, because you have group buffs that give you a crit chance, and that makes dual wielding a little bit better. For example, Ice Blink is there, and then you have maybe something like the 8% crit chance on multi-shot from a support DH, or you have a support necro that stacks these corpse lances everywhere, and so on. So the dual wielding becomes a bit better, but generally, also for the other setups, you can actually dual wield anyway if you find like really nice weapons, and you can just cube the quiver. The quiver is going to be a nightmare to get anyway, so this is actually not too unrealistic. So the difference is somewhere in the range of 5 to 10% DPS, depending on what exactly you're going for. And if you have like a really bad quiver, it can definitely be worth to just cube it and wear those weapons. And since we're talking about the weapon setups, in solo I showed that the Odysseus End is equipped. This is slightly stronger than wearing the Dawn, so you can go with either, but it comes down again to which weapon you roll. The thing is that the Dawn is really hard to use when you don't get a perfect roll, because the secondary range does a lot for the cooldown requirements. So any Dawn below like 63% on the affix is unusable, while theoretically you can use any Odysseus End. And on top of that, again, you have more damage per shot because it's a slow weapon, but you don't really lose much from it. So I expect the overall gain from wearing Odysseus End versus a Dawn, if you have like the equally well-rolled weapons, is somewhere between like 8 and 10% DPS. But it's going to make the boss fight slightly slower. And for dual wielding, you usually want to avoid rolling the 10% damage, because it spreads out to both your weapons, so you have only half of the value. So typically you go for other stats, so you just take like more area damage or elite damage, for example, or you just put all of your cooldown on the weapons as well. So this is some options you can go for, but this is just something I want to mention here. And then again, as I mentioned, otherwise make sure you have the cooldown required for Perma Vengeance, 37% or 3 items. And then, stack area damage, especially on something like the shoulders. It's a very nice slot. And then for speed farming setups, I suggest rings like these with physical and then double crit. And for pushing, I would go area damage and double crit. And otherwise, cold damage, because we have the devouring arrow. If you run another rune, shatter shot is also acceptable for T16, especially once you're geared and a bit stronger. But especially low end, I would suggest only devouring arrow. But yeah, you can run Shatter Shot as well later on at least. Or for Bolas, it might be lightning as well with the bitter pill or fire. So, just adjust to your elements. So this has been a lot of talk about the different setups here, but I wanted to get it all in. And as I mentioned, the defeat planners are all there, and I'm going to update them once we have the set in the defeat planner. And then I'm also going to keep them updated on my Discord, where I have like lots of defeat planners, so go check that out if you want. I also have like lots of other builds and other classes there, and then we will keep that maintained like pretty well there. But overall, you definitely see that there's not really much that you require for this. You just wear the set and then the quiver, and that's it. And you can, swap around so many things if you like. Potentially, you could even drop Dawn and try something like Obsidian Ring and so on. So there's definitely a lot of variety here, and you can just play whatever suits you best. And now finally for the gameplay. So typically at the start of a run, you want to get up your momentum to 20 stacks or 20 seconds right away. So you just shoot 5 times and then you start strafing, and you're already going to notice you're going to go super fast and so on. And then it comes a little bit down to just, feeling it, when you have to shoot again. You don't really have to shoot all the time, you just strafe around, and then you can just like weave in a generator here and there. Make sure to keep up the vengeance at all times. So this is a very important offensive and defensive buff. So just press it every 20 seconds and you're good. And otherwise, try to manage your resources a little bit, especially the discipline, because you have smooth screen here, and this is what keeps you alive or what keeps up your squirts and so on. And you want to make sure that you have it ready when you need it. For the start, I would suggest to always keep an eye on your momentum stacks so that you get a feel for it, and then later on you'll just muscle memory it and just shoot every once in a while. There is still a small bug where sometimes you don't get momentum stacks while strafing, and I don't really know what's causing this, but it happens that when you're strafing and then you attack with the generator in between your strafing cycles, that sometimes it just doesn't happen. And that might get fixed or it might not get fixed. It doesn't happen too often, but there might be certain things to avoid that maybe you find out in the future if they actually push this bug to life. Just something I want to mention here. You can't entirely rely on your muscle memory. You sometimes have to check your stacks and actually see if you got the momentum stacks or not. So it's a little bit annoying, but overall not really a big deal. And yeah, just be aware of this. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward, especially when you're speed farming. Just strafe around, make sure you don't get hit too much, to drop your squirts, and then you're good to go, and you're gonna get a hang of it really fast. It's a rather simple playstyle, but it has these tiny details that can improve your efficiency a bit by especially keeping up the squirts, positioning yourself a little bit. For example, Hanging Arrow also disappears quite fast when it flies near a wall or into the wall. So also water elites are something that you have to be mindful about, that can easily destroy your DPS. So when you see those, then yeah, maybe just skip them if you start seeing that they spawn walls in bad spots, and then just go next. Otherwise, don't be afraid. Also, especially when solo pushing, to just skip whatever is not really tightly grouped, or just stray enemies. They don't really die too fast. So, you really rely on those pierces from the Devouring Arrow. You want stuff to be really grouped, and if it's not grouped, you lose a lot of your damage. It's not terrible to kill something single target, but you can notice it's less, and you generally want to go for the juicy pulls, essentially. And also, this means that most of the time it's going to be quite hard to finish off elites when you're pushing, and this is also something to be careful about. It's going to be, like a build where you just, explore a lot, go for the big pulls, and then go, keep going, essentially. When you're playing a double generator setup with the entangling shot, there's also a lot more micromanagement. So essentially what you want to do is you strafe around with the entangling shot enabled. So the 4-piece always shoots your last used generator. So you press the entangling shot and then you strafe around and you'll entangle everything up. Entangle will not necessarily have to hit the target that you want to entangle. So as soon as it hits the pole, and the target that is not entangled it slowly adds more targets to the entangled chain. So even if you just shoot onto the same target in a pull every time, it will slowly spread to all the enemies around until a certain distance. So this is pretty nice. And then you just do this for a few seconds, and you will usually entangle up the entire pull. With Odyssey's End, you have the buff stacked up on everything, and then you can swap to a Hanging Arrow for around 3 seconds. Then you swap back to the entangle. You have to do one entangle to keep the entire chain up again. So you just refresh the duration once every 4 seconds, and then you can swap back to Hanging Arrow. So it's typically what you want to do when you're pushing, with Odyssey's End especially. You entangle everything, you strafe around, and then when you feel like you've shot enough entangling shots, you can swap to Hanging Arrow, and then you swap back and forth once every around 3.5 seconds or so. So I typically do this by pressing Smooth Screen, then pressing Entangling Shot, and then pressing Hanging Arrow right after, and then I start strafing again with Hanging Arrows just going out. and I do this cycle like once every 3.5 seconds. So it's a little bit tricky, it requires a little bit of practice. So in solo, this is actually kind of hard to play in that regard, because you really need to muscle memory the timing, and you can try to go a bit more greedy, try to get like a couple more shots out before you re-entangle and so on. So there's definitely some gameplay involved here that will also allow you to grow as you play the build. Also, another really cool thing is that missile dampening is a very good affix. So while the walls are really bad, we have missile dampening, which is really good, because those arrows, they disappear after a certain distance, and essentially when they're slowed so much, they will stay inside of the pole and just keep piercing over and over, and your damage goes nuts when that happens. And this is something that is really nice. Like, essentially every missile dampening pack is a free kill in like half a minute or less. So you just can even like drag them around a bit and try to kill everything around with this missile dampening, and then finish off the guy itself, because it's just that good. It gives you like a ×5 or ×10 or even more damage multiplier. So this is also something to be aware about, that you always want to go for those. And this is about it for this guide. So I know it's been quite long, but it's a new build, it's a lot of new stuff, a lot of new mechanics, and I also included all the different setups here. So I hope that this covers whatever questions you might have. And otherwise, I'm gonna definitely be playing this a lot during the season. So it's gonna be my main build, my main class. I'm quite excited to try this, and I think it's gonna be a pretty amazing season for Demon Hunters, and probably beyond as well, because the build is strong. I think it's pretty fun to play, and I think a lot of people will have fun with this as well. So I hope you liked this video here, and I'll see you guys next time.